John, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, and to get started, can you give the audience a little bit of background on your history in UX?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll kind of go way back. I was that kid that was always drawing, and I guess that, sci-fi scenes or fictional characters and my, favorite punk rock band logos. And, eventually kind of led me to art school where I realized that I'd been doing graphic design all along, really. So that spurred an interest in kind of pursuing that path and, graduated doing graphic design, but it just so happened to converge with the kind of launch of the first iPhone. And I got really interested in the digital space, and that kind of led me to, digital agencies doing websites and apps, of course. But, through the process of kind of, refining, cultivating my design practice, really wanting to make it not only look good, the work that I was doing, but make it work really good too. So it's this kind of natural progression that happens where you get gradually more and more interested in user experience and that functional aspect of design. So that kind of led me down a path of pursuing opportunities in the UX space. And, fast forward to now where that's, my sole focus at, large organizations that are, trying to, tackle really complex engineering challenges and focused on user experience overall.
In particular, one of the things you've been doing as of late is focusing on biases, which we haven't really talked about a lot on the show, but are super important. Can you explain a little bit about maybe some common biases and why is that important for designers to be aware of?
Sure. So, I think a lot of times, designers might be aware of cognitive bias and how that has a tendency to affect judgment and decisions, which obviously plays an important role in the design process. But I don't think it's very often talked about in the context of how it affects us as designers.
Yeah.
Of course, it affects users as well, but it also affects how designers kind of create design. So this kind of led me down a path of really being interested in this topic and, really kind of investigating how these different biases could affect the design process. Just kind of drawing on a few examples, I think, we've all been in that meeting where someone says like, I as a user, that's kind of fundamentally a flawed way of thinking from a design perspective, because, of course, as designers, we're much too close to the work that we're creating. And it's really impossible for us to separate ourselves from that work. So seeing things from the perspective of a user is particularly challenging for us. And that's an example of the false consensus effect, So, that's a fallacy that we can quickly fall into the trap of during the design process that leads us down a path of making decisions or forming judgments around work that it is, not factual. It's not true, right? So we've all been in meetings where it's like, oh, how should we approach XYZ problem? And someone says, well, how does this company do it? How does our competitor do it? And sometimes, this can be helpful, ideation, but we can quickly fall into this trap of using available information and assuming that it applies to the context in which we're designing for. So, the problem that X example might solve is completely different from yours, but you're kind of using that available information that you have to form your own decisions. And that can also lead to faulty decision-making and poor judgment.
Yeah, and this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the cognitive biases. And I think beyond awareness, it's like cognitive behavioral therapy in psychology. The concept seems easy. Hey, just stop your thoughts and become aware anytime you have an anxious thought, and then stop it. Like, I think awareness is one thing, but actually, how do you catch yourself in these biases? Because there are tons of them. And it seems like you almost have to actively be thinking about every decision you make and say, is this biased? Is this biased? Mm-hmm. Which seems difficult and maybe like a lot of time investment. So practically, how can designers stop themselves and say, oh, that's a biased decision, or avoid biased design decisions?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And unfortunately, it's not one that's easily answered. I think that's primarily because, our biases are always happening, right? It's only once we kind of slow down and we really start to evaluate things for an extended amount of time that system two thinking kicks in. And system one is that automatic kind of process that, you can't really turn off. It's always happening. It's where our biases live, right? And it kind of helps us just really be efficient. But it's not until we stop and pause and evaluate things closer that system two thinking kicks in. And it's actually the system two thinking that helps us kind of avoid the biases that have the potential to really impact us in a negative way. So, I think really the best that we can do is somewhat of a compromise, learning how to recognize situations in which, our design decisions are likely to be there and be affected by cognitive bias, and then try harder to avoid the mistakes that come with biases when left unchecked, when the stakes are really high.
So Jon, biases they all sound scary, but are they all a bad thing?
Absolutely not. I mean, in fact, they're actually necessary, right? Like we have to make thousands upon thousands of decisions every single day, and most of which we're not even cognizant of, right? So it's the kind of biases that kick in that help us inform judgment and make decisions that really help us get through that onslaught of information that we're presented with.
So Jon, there seems like there's a lot of biases out there. Which ones are the top ones that as a designer you should be aware of that can actually affect the output of your work or the design process?
There's quite a bit. And I think that, the funny thing about biases is once you learn about them, you see them absolutely everywhere. In fact, our work is just absolutely riddled with them. So it's really kind of a process of building awareness of them in general, and knowing about the ones that have a tendency to have the most negative impact if left unchecked, right? So really, I think that it's about understanding our biases and kind of overcoming them when we know that they can affect our judgment and decisions in a negative way. And then also understanding our biases, the biases of others, which can help us obviously improve user experience overall. And I've done quite a bit of thinking about this, and it's led me down this process of kind of extensive research and really kind of honing in on the ones that I think have the potential to have the most negative impact, and then also the ones that have a tendency to surface more frequently. And I've kind of aggregated those in a resource called Bias by Design, which is available online at biasbydesign.com. And I think really it's a kind of an ongoing resource. It's not a comprehensive kind of list, but truth be told, there's thousands, there's lots of different ways that biases can affect our decisions. And I try to kind of use this aggregated resource, Bias by Design, to really kind of collect the ones that I think have the potential to have the biggest negative impact.
Nice. I need to dive deeper into that resource. Thanks for sharing that and learn about my own biases. And awesome. Thanks for doing that, because I'm sure it's helping designers become more aware of that, which ultimately helps the end user. Jon, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.